I have to play that song because I need a break. So I'm kind of like letting you know in advance. That's just the way it fucking goes. So, where was I? Chapter 16, The Hermetic Legend. Hold on. I've got props. Ooh. A Masonic apron with symbolic figures. While the mystic symbolism of Freemasonry decrees that the apron shall be a simple square of white lambskin with appropriate flap, Masonic aprons are frequently decorated with curious and impressive figures. When silk, cotton, or linen is worn, writes Albert Pike, the symbolism is lost. Nor is one clothed who blots, defaces, and desecrates the white surface with ornamentation, figuring, or colors of any kind. See symbolism. To Mars, the ancient planet of cosmic energy, the Atlantean and Chaldean stargazers assigned Aries as a diurnal throne and Scorpio as the nocturnal throne. Those not raised to spiritual life by initiation are described as dead from the sting of the scorpion, for they wander in the night side of divine power through the mystery of the Paschal Lamb or the attainment of the Golden Fleece. These souls are raised into the constructive day power of Mars and Aries, the symbol of the Creator. When worn over the area related to the animal passions, the pure lambskin signifies the regeneration of the procreative forces and their consecration to the service of the deity. The size of the apron, exclusive of the flap, makes it the symbol of salvation, for the mysteries declare that it must consist of 144 square inches. The apron shown above contains a wealth of symbolism: the beehive, emblematic of the Masonic Lodge itself, the trowel, the mallet, and the trestle board, the rough and true ashlars, the pyramids and hills of Lebanon, the pillars, the temple, the checkerboard of the macrocosm and the microcosm. No, hold on. The temple and the checkerboard and the blazing star and tools of the craft. The center of the apron is occupied by the compass and square, representative of the macrocosm and microcosm, and the alternately black and white serpent of astral light. Below is an acacia branch with 7 sprigs, signifying the life centers of the superior and the inferior man. The skull and crossbones are a continual reminder that the spiritual nature attains liberation only after the philosophical death of man's sensuous personality. Study up. Anyways, Hermetic Legend, Chapter 16. When or then, Solomon, the beloved of God, builder of everlasting house and grand master of the Lodge of Jerusalem, ascended the throne of his father David, he consecrated his life to the erection of a temple to God and a palace for the kings of Israel. David's faithful friend Hiram, king of Tyre, hearing that a son of David sat upon the throne of Israel, sent messages of congratulation and offers of assistance to the new ruler. In his History of the Jews, Josephus mentions that copies of the letters passing between the two kings were then to be seen both at Jerusalem and Tyre. Despite Hiram's lack of appreciation for the 20 cities of Galilee which Solomon presented to him upon the completion of the temple, the two monarchs remained the best of friends. Both were famous for their wit and wisdom, and when they exchanged letters, each devised puzzling questions to test the mental ingenuity of the other. Solomon made an agreement with Hiram of Tyre, promising vast amounts of barley, wheat, corn, wine, and oil as wages for the masons and carpenters of Tyre, who were to assist the Jews in in the erection of the temple. Hiram also supplied cedars and other fine trees, which were made into rafts and floated down the Sea of Joppa. Didn't I just read about Joppa? Sorry, I just read about Joppa in the last fucking book I read. That's why I like fucking doing this. Correlates. That's what it's about. Anyways, where was I? Juice? Hiram also supplied cedars and other fine trees, which were made into rafts and floated down the sea to Joppa, whence they were taken inland by Solomon's workmen to the temple site. Because of his great love for Solomon, Hiram of Tyre sent also the grand master of the dynastic architects, Hiram Abiff, a widow's son who had no equal among the craftsmen of the earth. C. Hiram is described as being a Tyrian by birth, but of Israelite descent, and a second Beazel, honored by his king with the title of father. The Freemason's Pocket Companion, published in 1771, describes Hiram as the most cunning, skillful, and curious workman that ever lived, whose abilities were not confined to building alone, but extended to all kinds of work, whether in gold, silver, brass, or iron, whether in linen, tapestry, or embroidery, whether considered as an architect, statuary, founder, or designer, separately or together, he equally excelled. From his designs and under his direction, all the rich and splendid furniture of the temple and its several appendages were begun, carried on, and finished. Solomon appointed him in his absence to fill the chair as deputy grand master, and in his presence senior grand warden, master of work, and general overseer of all artists, as well those whom David had formerly procured from Tyre and Sidon, as those Hiram should now send. Modern Masonic writers differ as to the accuracy of the last sentence. Well, I want to reread it again. Sorry. Shit, that's a long sentence. Where is it? Wow. You have to deal with this. This is how this works. I'm reading, and if something looks good, I'm going back and rereading it. I don't give a shit. From his designs and under his direction, all the rich and splendid furniture of the temple and its several appendages were begun, carried on, and finished. Simon appointed him in his absence to fill the chair as deputy grand master, and in his presence senior grand warden, master of work, and general overseer of all artists, as well those whom David had formerly procured from Tyre and Sidon, as those Hiram should now send. All right. Although an immense amount of labor was involved in its construction, Solomon's Temple, in the words of George Oliver, was only a small building and very inferior in point of size to some of our churches. The number of buildings contiguous to it and the vast treasure of gold and precious stones used in its construction concentrated a great amount of wealth within the temple area. In the midst of the temple stood the Holy of Holies, sometimes called the Oracle. It was an exact cube, each dimension being 20 cubits, and exemplified the influence of Egyptian symbolism. The buildings of the temple group were ornamented with 1,453 columns of Paran marble, magnificently sculptured, and 2,906 pilasters decorated with capitals. There was a broad porch facing the east, and the sanctorium was upon the west. According to tradition, the various buildings and courtyards could hold in all 300,000 persons. Both the sanctuary and the Holy of Holies were entirely lined with solid gold plates encrusted with jewels. King Solomon began the building of the temple in the 4th year of his reign on what would be, according to modern calculation, the 21st day of April, and finished it in the 11th year of his reign on the 23rd day of October. The temple was begun in the 480th year after the children of Israel had passed the Red Sea. Part of the labor of construction included the building of an artificial foundation on the brow of Mount Moriah. The stones for the temple were hoisted from quarries directly beneath Mount Moriah and were trued before being brought to the surface. The brass and golden ornaments for the temple were cast in molds in the clay ground between Succoth and Zeradatha, and the wooden parts were all finished before they reached the temple site. The building was put together, consequently, without sound and without instruments, all its parts fitting exactly, without the hammer of contention, the axe of division, or any tool of mischief. Anderson's much-discussed Constitutions of the Freemasons, published in London in 1723 and reprinted by Benjamin Franklin in Philadelphia, 1734, thus describes the division of the laborers engaged in the building of Everlasting House. Okay. But Dagon's temple and the finest structures of Tyre and Sidon could not be compared with the eternal God's temple at Jerusalem. There were employed about it no less than 3,600 princes or master masons to conduct the work according to Solomon's directions, with 80,000 hewers of stone in the mountain, or fellow craftsmen, and 70,000 laborers, in all 153,600, besides the levy under Adoram, the levy under Adoniram to work in the mountains of Lebanon by turns with the Sidonians, viz. 30,000 being in all 183,600. Whatever. Daniel Sickles gives 3,300 overseers instead of 3,600 and lists the 3 grand masters separately. The same author estimates the cost of the temple at nearly 4,000 millions of dollars. That's what it says. The Masonic legends of the building of Solomon's temple does not in every particular parallel the scriptural version, especially in those portions relating to Hiram Abiff. According to the biblical account, this master workman returned to his own country. In the Masonic allegory, he is foully murdered. On this point, A.E. Waite, in his new Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, makes the following explanatory comment. The legend of the master builder is the great allegory of Masonry. It happens that his figurative story is grounded on the fact of a personality mentioned in Holy Scripture. But this historical background is of the accidents and not the essence. The significance is in the allegory and not in any point of history which may lie behind it. Hiram, as master of the builders, divided his workmen into 3 groups, which were termed entered apprentices, fellow craftsmen, and master masons. To each division he gave certain passwords and signs by which their respective excellence could be quickly determined. Damn it, I'm going to reread it. To each division he gave certain passwords and signs by which their respective excellence could be quickly determined. While all were classified according to their merits, some were dissatisfied, for they desired a more exalted position than they were capable of filling. At last 3 fellow craftsmen, more daring than their companions, determined to force Hiram to reveal to them the password of the master's degree. Knowing that Hiram always went into the unfurnished sanctum sanctorum at high noon to pray, these ruffians, whose names were Jabelio, and Jabelum, lay in wait for him at one at each of the main gates of the temple. Hiram, about to leave the temple by the south gate, was suddenly confronted by Jabellah, armed with a 24-inch gauge, Upon Hiram's refusal to reveal the master's word, the ruffian struck him on the throat with the rule, and the wounded master then hastened to the west gate, where Jubileo, armed with a square, awaited him and made a similar demand. Again, Hiram was silent, and the second assassin struck him on the breast with the square. Hiram thereupon staggered to the east gate, only to be met by Jubileum, armed with a maul. When Hiram refused him the master's word, Jubileum struck the master between the eyes with the mallet, and Hiram fell dead. So yeah, that's the Jubileum bullshit they talk about. Awesome. The body of Hiram was buried by the murderers over the brow of Mount Moriah, and a sprig of acacia placed upon the grave. The murderers then sought to escape punishment for their crime by embarking to Ethiopia, but the port was closed. All three were finally captured, and after admitting their guilt, were duly executed. Parties of three were then set out by King Solomon, and one of these groups discovered the newly made grave marked by the evergreen sprig. After the entered apprentices and the fellow craftsmen had failed to resurrect their master from the dead, he was finally raised by the master mason with the strong grip of a lion's paw. And the initiated... Oh, wait. If it ever sounds like I'm being... I don't know. I don't care about this shit. I don't mean that. When I read it, I really do care. You know, I take it all on face value, man. Fuck them. All of them. You know, if it speaks to me, that's totally different. If it's just a story about some old people beating the shit out of each other, it's kind of hard for me to give a fuck. So just want to let y'all know, if anyone's listening out there in La La Land, that's where my brain's at. I really do absorb it in some weird way, but I'm not taking this shit serious. I mean, they take it serious. That's cool. That's cool. Take it serious. Fuck. Look what you've done with the world, taking it serious. That's amazing shit. I just don't care. Anyways, to the initiated builder, the name Hiram Abiff signifies my father, the universal spirit, one in essence, three in aspect. Thus, the murdered master is a type of the cosmic martyr, the crucified spirit of good, the dying God, whose mystery is celebrated throughout the world. Among the manuscripts of Dr. Sigmund Bachstrom, the initiated Rosicrucian, appeared the following extract from von Welling concerning the true philosophic nature of the Masonic Hiram. The original word, Hiram, is a radical word consisting of three consonants, Cheth, Resh, and Mem. Cheth signifies Chama, the sun's light, the universal, invisible, cold fire of nature attracted by the sun, manifested in the light and sent down to us and to every planetary body belonging to the solar system. Resh signifies Rosh, i.e., spirit, air, wind, as being the vehicle which conveys and collects the light into numberless foci, wherein the solar rays of light are agitated by a circular motion and manifested in heat and burning fire. Mem signifies Majim, water, humidity, but rather the mother of water, i.e., radical humidity, or a particular kind of condensed air. These three constitute the universal agent of fire of nature in one word, Haram, not Hiram. It's Chiram, not Hiram. I say Hiram, Chiram. I'll say Chiram from now on. Now I understand why they do that. Albert Pike mentions several forms of the name: Chiram, Hiram, and Kuram, and Kuram, the latter ending in the sacred Hindu monosyllable Om, which may also be extracted from the names of the three murderers. Pike further relates the three ruffians to the triad of stars in the constellation of Libra, and also calls attention to the fact that the Chaldean god Baal, metamorphosed into a demon by the Jews, appeared in the name of each of the murderers: Jubala, jubilo, and jubilum, which bell, bell, bell. Okay. To interpret the Hermetic legend requires familiarity with both the Pythagorean and Kabbalistic systems of numbers and letters, and also the philosophic and astronomic cycles of the Egyptians, Chaldeans, and Brahmins. For example, consider the number 33. The first temple of Solomon stood for 33 years in its pristine splendor. At the end of that time, it was pillaged by the Egyptian king Shishak, and finally, 588 BC, it was completely destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and the people of Jerusalem were led into captivity to Babylon. See General History of Freemasonry by Robert McCoy. Also, King David ruled for 33 years in Jerusalem. The Masonic order is divided into 33 symbolic degrees. There are 33 segments in the human spinal column, and Jesus was crucified in the 33rd year of his life. The efforts made to discover the origin of Hiramic legend show that while the legend in its present form is comparatively modern, its underlying principles run back to remotest antiquity. It is generally admitted by modern Masonic scholars that the story of the martyred Chiram is based upon the Egyptian rites of Osiris, whose death and resurrection figuratively portrayed the spiritual death of man and his regeneration through initiation into the mysteries. Chiram is also identified with Hermes through the inscription of the Emerald Table. From these associations, it is evident that Chiram is to be considered as a prototype of humanity. In fact, he is Plato's archetype of man. As Adam after the fall symbolizes the idea of human degeneration, so Chiram, through his resurrection, symbolizes the idea of human regeneration. On the 19th day of March, 1314, Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master of the Knights Templars, was burned on a pier erected upon that point of the islet of the Seine at Paris. Afterwards was erected the statue of King Henry IV. See Indian Religions by Hargrave Jennings. It is mentioned as a tradition in some of the accounts of the burning, writes Jennings, that Molay, ere he expired, summoned Clement, the Pope, who had pronounced the bull of abolition against the order and had condemned the Grand Master to the flames, to appear within 40 days before the Supreme Eternal Judge, and Philip the King to the same awful tribunal within the space of a year. Both predictions were fulfilled. The close relationship between Freemasonry and the original Knights Templars has caused the story of Chiram to be linked with the martyrdom of Jacques de Molay. According to this interpretation, the three ruffians who cruelly slew their master at the gates of the temple because he refused to reveal the secrets of his order, represent the Pope, the King, and the executioners. De Molay died maintaining his innocence and refusing to disclose the philosophical and magical arcana of the Templars. Thus, who have sought to identify Chiram with the murdered King Charles I conceived that Hermetic legend to have been invented for that purpose by Elias Ashmole, a mystical philosopher who was probably a member of the Rosicrucian fraternity. Charles was dethroned in 1647 and died on the block in 1649, leaving the Royalist Party leaderless. An attempt has been made to relate the term the Sons of the Widow, an appellation frequently applied to the members of the Masonic order, to this incident in English history, for by the murder of her king England became a widow, and all Englishmen widows' sons. To the mystic Christian Mason, Chiram represents the Christ who in 3 degrees raised the temple of his body from its earthly sepulchre. His three murderers were Caesar's agent, the state, the Sanhedrin, the church, and the incited populace, the mob. Thus considered, Chiram becomes the higher nature of man, and the murderers of ignorance, superstition, and fear. The indwelling Christ can give expression to himself in this world only through man's thoughts, feelings, and actions. Right thinking, right feeling, and right action. These are three gates through which the Christ power passes into the material world, there to labor in the erection of the temple of universal brotherhood. Ignorance, superstition, and fear are the three ruffians through whose agencies the spirit of good is murdered and false kingdom, controlled by wrong thinking, wrong feeling, and wrong action, established in its stead. In the material universe, evil appears ever victorious. In this sense, writes Daniel Sickles, the myth of the Tyrrhenian is perpetually repeated in the history of human affairs. Orpheus was murdered and his body thrown into the Hebrus. Socrates was made to drink the hemlock, and in all ages we have seen evil temporarily triumphant and virtue and truth calumniated, persecuted, crucified, and slain. But eternal justice marched surely and swiftly through the world. The Typhons, the children of darkness, the plotters of crime, all the infinitely varied forms of evil are swept into oblivion, and truth and virtue, for a time laid low, come forth clothed with diviner majesty and crowned with everlasting glory. See General Haman Rezin. If, as there is ample reason to suspect, the modern Freemasonic order was profoundly influenced by, if it is not an actual outgrowth of, Francis Bacon's secret society, its symbolism is undoubtedly permeated with Bacon's two great ideals, universal education and universal democracy. The deadly enemies of universal education are ignorance, superstition, and fear, by which the human soul is held in bondage to the lowest part of its own constitution. The errant enemies of, that's ARRANT, enemies of universal democracy have ever been the crown, the tyra, and the torch. Thus, Chiram symbolizes the ideal state of spiritual, intellectual, and physical emancipation which has ever been sacrificed upon the altar of human selfishness. Chiram is the beautifier of the eternal house. Modern utilitarianism, however, sacrifices the beautiful for the practical, in the same breath declaring the obvious lie that selfishness, hatred, and discord are practical. Dr. Orville Ward Owen found a considerable part of the first 32 degrees of Freemasonic ritualism hidden in the text of the first Shakespeare folio. Masonic emblems are to be observed also upon the title pages of nearly every book published by Bacon. Sir Francis Bacon considered himself as a living sacrifice upon the altar of human need. He was obviously cut down in the midst of his labors, and no student of his New Atlantis can fail to recognize the Masonic symbolism contained therein. According to the observations of Joseph Fort Newton, the Temple of Solomon, the Temple of Solomon, described by Bacon in that utopian romance, was not a house at all, but the name of an ideal state. Is it not true that the Temple of Freemasonry is also emblematic of a condition of society? Hold on. New picture. It'll take me a sip of coffee, too. All right. Who's this? Diana of Ephesus is the picture, if you're wondering. Crowned with a triple tower-like tiara and her form adorned with symbolic creatures representative of her spiritual powers, Diana stood for the source of that imperishable doctrine which, flowing from the bosom of the great Multimamia, is the spiritual food of those aspiring men and women who have consecrated their lives to the contemplation of reality. As the physical body of man receives its nutriment from the great earth mother, so the spiritual nature of man is fed from the never failing fountains of truth pouring outward from the invisible worlds. Got a lot of teats, if you haven't noticed. While, as before stated, the principles of the Hiramic legend are of the greatest antiquity, it is not impossible that its present form may be based upon incidents in the life of Lord Bacon, who passed through the philosophic death and was raised in Germany. In an old manuscript appears the statement that the Freemasonic order was formed by alchemists and hermetic philosophers who had banded themselves together to protect their secrets against the infamous methods used by avaricious persons to wring from them the secret of gold making. The fact that Hiramic legend contains an alchemical formula gives credence to this story. Thus, the building of Solomon's temple represents the consummation of the magnum opus, which cannot be realized without the assistance of Cherem, the universal agent. The Masonic mysteries teach the initiate how to prepare within his own soul a miraculous power of projection by which it is possible for him to transmute the base lump of human ignorance, perversion, and discord into an ingot of spiritual and philosophic gold. Sufficient similarity exists between the Masonic Cherem and the Kundalini of Hindu mysticism to warrant the assumption that Cherem, I gotta call him Hiram, I don't like this Cherem, may be considered a symbol also of the spirit fire moving through the sixth vertical of the spinal column. Try that again. Sufficient similarity exists between the Masonic Hiram and the Kundalini of Hindu mysticism to warrant the assumption that Hiram may be considered a symbol also of the spirit fire moving through the sixth ventricle of the spinal column. The exact science of human regeneration is the lost key of Masonry, for when the spirit fire is lifted up through the 33rd degrees, all segments of the spinal column, and enters into the dome chamber of the human skull, it finally passes into the pituitary body, Isis, where it invokes Ra, the pineal gland, and demands the sacred name. Operative Masonry, in the fullest meaning of that term, signifies the process by which the eye of Horus is opened. E.A. Wallace Budge has noted that in some of the papyri illustrating the entrance of the souls of the dead into the judgment hall of Osiris, the deceased person has a pine cone attached to the crown of his head. The Greek mysteries also carried a symbolic staff, the upper end being in the form of a pine cone, which was also called Thyrsus or of Bacchus. In the human brain, there is a tiny gland called the pineal body, which is the sacred eye of the ancients and corresponds to the third eye of Cyclops. Little is known concerning the function of the pineal body, which Descartes, or whatever, suggested more wisely than he knew might be the abode of the spirit of man. As it namely signifies, the pineal gland is the sacred pine cone in man, the eye single, which cannot be opened until Cherem, the spirit fire, is raised through the sacred seals, which are called the seven churches of Asia, in Asia. There is an Oriental painting which shows three sunbursts. One sunburst covers the head, in the midst of which sits Brahma with four heads, his body a mysterious dark color. The second sunburst, which covers the heart, solar plexus, and upper abdominal region, shows Vishnu sitting in the blossom of the lotus on the couch formed of the coils of the serpent of cosmic motion, its seven-hooded head forming a canopy over the god. The third sunburst is over the generative system, in the midst of which sits Shiva, his body a grayish white, and the Ganges River flowing out of the crown of his head. This painting was the work of a Hindu mystic who spent many years subtly concealing great philosophical principles within these figures. The Christian legends could be related also to the human body by the same method as the Oriental, for the arcane meanings hidden in the teachings of both schools are identical. As applied to Masonry, the three sunbursts represent the gates of the temple at which Hiram was struck, there being no gate in the north because the sun never shines from the northern angle of the heavens. The north is the symbol of the physical because of its relation to ice, crystallized water, and to the body, crystallized spirit. In man, the light shines towards the north, but never from it, because the body has no light of its own, but shines with the reflected glory of the divine life particles concealed within physical substance. For this reason, the moon is accepted as the symbol of man's physical nature. Hiram is the mysterious, fiery, airy water which must be raised through the three grand centers, symbolized by the ladder with three rungs and the sunburst flowers mentioned in the description of the Hindu painting. It must also pass upward by means of a ladder of 7 rungs. The 7 plexuses proximate to the spine. The 9 segments of the sacrum and coccyx are pierced by 10 foramina through which pass the roots of the tree of life. 9 is the sacred number of man, and in symbolism of the sacrum, a coccyx of great mystery is concealed. The part of the body from the kidneys downward was termed by the early Kabbalists the land of Egypt, into which the children of Israel were taken during the captivity. Out of Egypt, Moses, the illumined mind, as his name implies, led the tribes of Israel, the 12 faculties, by raising the brazen serpent in the wilderness upon the symbol of the Tau cross. Not only Hiram, but the god-men of nearly every pagan mystery ritual are personifications of the spirit fire in the human spinal cord. The astronomical aspect of the Hiramic legend must not be overlooked. The tragedy of Hiram is enacted annually by the sun during its passage through the signs of the zodiac. From the journey of the sun through the 12 signs, writes Albert Pike, come the legend of the 12 labors of Hercules and the incarnations of Vishnu and Buddha. Hence came the legend of the murder of Kerman, representative of the sun, by the 3 fellow crafts, symbols of the winter signs, Capricornus, Aquarius, and Pisces, who assailed him at the 3 gates of heaven and slew him at the winter solstice. Hence the search for him by the 9 fellow crafts, the other 9 signs, his finding, burial, and resurrections. See Morals and Dogma. Other authors consider Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius as the 3 murderers of the sun, inasmuch as Osiris was murdered by Typhon, to whom were assigned the 30 degrees of the constellation of Scorpio. In the Christian mysteries, also Judas signifies the scorpion, and the 30 pieces of silver for which he betrayed his Lord represent the number of degrees in that sign. Having been struck by Libra, the state, Scorpio, the church, and Sagittarius, the mob, the sun, Chiram, is secretly born through the darkness by the signs of Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces, and buried over the brow of a hill, the vernal equinox. Capricorn has for its symbol an old man with a scythe in his hand. This is Father Time, a wayfarer who is symbolized in Masonry as straightening out the ringlets of a younger girl's hair. If the weeping virgin be considered a symbol of Virgo and Father Time with his scythe a symbol of Capricorn, then the interval of 90 degrees between these 2 signs will be found to correspond to that occupied by the 3 murderers. Esoterically, the urn containing the ashes of Hiram represents the human heart. Saturn, the old man who lives at the North Pole and brings with him to the children of men a sprig of evergreen. The Christmas tree is familiar to the little folks under the name Santa Claus, for he brings each winter the gift of a new year. The martyred sun is discovered by Aries, a fellow craftsman, and at the vernal equinoxes, the process of raising him begins. This is finally accomplished by the Lion of Judah, who in ancient times occupied the position of the keystone of the royal arch of heaven. The procession of the equinoxes causes various signs to play the role of the murderers of the sun during the different ages of the world, but the principle involved remains unchanged. Such is the cosmic story of Hiram, the universal benefactor, the fiery architect of the divine house, who carries with him to the grave that lost word which, when spoken, raises all life to power and glory. According to the Christian mysticism, when the lost word is found, it is discovered in a stable, surrounded by beasts and marked by a star. After the sun leaves Leo, writes Robert Hewitt Brown, the days begin to grow unequivocally shorter as the sun declines towards the autumnal equinox, to be again slain by the 3 autumnal months, lie dead through the 3 winter ones, and be raised again by the 3 vernal ones. Each year the great tragedy is repeated, and thus glorious resurrection takes place. See Stellar Theology and Masonic Astronomy. Hiram is termed dead because in the average individual, the cosmic creative forces are limited in their manifestation to purely physical and correspondingly materialistic expression. Obsessed by his belief in the reality and permanence of physical existence, man does not correlate the material universe with the blank north wall of the temple. As the solar light symbolically is said to die as it approaches the winter solstice, so the physical world may be termed the winter solstice of the spirit. Reaching the winter solstice, the sun apparently stands still for 3 days, and then, rolling away the stone of winter, begins its triumphal march north towards the summer solstice. The condition of ignorance may be likened to the winter solstice of philosophy, spiritual understanding to the summer solstice. From this point of view, initiation into the mysteries becomes the vernal equinox of the spirit, at which time the Hiram in man crosses from the realm of mortality into that of eternal life. The autumnal equinox is analogous to the mythological fall of man, at which time the human spirit descended into the realms of Hades by being immersed in the illusion of terrestrial existence. Cool. Oh, yeah, I got to keep going. Need some coffee. Yeah, I like doing it this way. That's how I'm going to fucking do it from now on. In an essay on the beautiful, Plotinus describes the refining effect of beauty upon the unfolding consciousness of man. Commissioned to decorate the everlasting house, Hiram Abiff is the embodiment of the beautifying principle. Beauty is essential to the natural unfoldment of the human soul. The mysteries held that man, in part at least, was the product of his environment. Excuse me. Therefore, they considered it imperative that every person be surrounded by objects which would evoke the highest and noblest sentiments. They proved that it was possible to produce beauty in life by surrounding life with beauty. They discovered that symmetrical bodies were built by souls continuously in the presence of symmetrical bodies, that noble thoughts were produced by minds surrounded by examples of mental nobility. Conversely, if a man were forced to look upon an ignoble or asymmetrical structure, it would arouse within him a sense of ignobility, which would provoke him to commit ignoble deeds. If an ill-proportioned building were erected in the midst of a city, there would be ill-proportioned children born in that community, and men and women gazing upon the asymmetrical structure would live inharmonious lives. Thoughtful men of antiquity realized that their great philosophers were the natural products of the aesthetic ideals of architecture, music, and art established as the standards of the cultural systems of the time. If that paragraph doesn't ring out to you when you look around this world, there's something fucking wrong with you. Straight up. You should be paying attention to that one and going out and thinking and contemplating on life. The substitution of the discord of the fantastic for the harmony of the beautiful constitutes one of the great tragedies of every civilization. Not only were the savior gods of the ancient world beautiful, but each performed a ministry of beauty, seeking to effect man's regeneration by arousing within him the love of the beautiful. A renaissance of the golden age of fable can be made possible only by the elevation of beauty to its rightful dignity as the all-pervading, idealizing quality in the religious, ethical, sociological, scientific, and political departments of life. The Dionysic architects were consecrated to the raising of their master spirit, cosmic beauty, from the sepulture of material ignorance and selfishness by erecting buildings which were such perfect exemplars of symmetry and majesty that they were actually magical formula by which was evoked the spirit of the martyred beautifier entombed within a materialistic world. In the Masonic mysteries, the triune spirit of man, the light delta, is symbolized by the three grand masters of the Lodge of Jerusalem. As God is the pervading principle of three worlds, in each of which he manifests as an active principle, so the spirit of man, partaking of the nature of divinity, dwells upon the three planes of being. The supreme, the superior, and the inferior spheres of the Pythagoreans. At the gate of the inferior sphere, the underworld or dwelling place of mortal creatures, stands the guardian of Hades, the three-headed dog Cerberus, who is analogous to the three murderers of the Hiramic legend. According to this symbolic interpretation of the triune spirit, Hiram is the third or incarnating part, the master builder who through all ages erects living temples of flesh and blood as shrines to the Most High. Hiram comes forth as the flower and is cut down. He dies at the gates of matter. He is buried in the elements of creation, but like Thor, he swings his mighty hammer in the fields of space. Hold on. He is buried in the elements of creation, but like Thor, he swings his mighty hammer in the fields of space, sets the primordial atoms in motion, and establishes order out of chaos. Woo! As the potentiality of cosmic power within each human soul. Hiram lies waiting for man by the elaborate ritualism of life to transmute potentiality into divine potency. As the sense perceptions of the individual increase, however, man gains ever greater control over his various parts, and the spirit of life within gradually attains freedom. The three murderers represent the law of the inferior world, birth, growth, and decay, which ever frustrate the plan of the builder. To the average individual, physical birth actually signifies the death of Hiram, and physical death, the resurrection of Hiram. To the initiate, however, the resurrection of the spiritual nature is accomplished without the intervention of physical death. I'm not even going to say nothing. Not even going to say nothing, dude. I'm sorry. That's what I'm talking about. When things resonate, when things hit you, like I can read and I joke around and I laugh, but all these things aren't just a bunch of dudes jerking each other off in a cave. That's part of it. But there's a lot of shit that's heavy in there. I don't know. I don't know what it means. I don't fucking care either. I just find it very fascinating. The curious symbols found in the base of Cleopatra's Needle, now standing in Central Park, New York, were interpreted as being of the first Masonic significance by S.A. Zola, 33rd degree, past Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Egypt. Masons' marks and symbols are to be found on the stones of numerous public buildings, not only in England and on the continent, but also in Asia. In his Indian Mason's marks of the Mughal dynasty, A. Gorham describes scores of markings appearing on the walls of buildings such as the Taj Mahal, the Jama Masjid, and the famous Masonic structure, the Qutb Minar. According to those who regard Masonry as an outgrowth of the secret society of architects and builders which for thousands of years formed a caste of master craftsmen, Hiram Abiff was the Tyrian Grand Master of a worldwide organization of artisans with headquarters in Tyre. Their philosophy consisted of incorporating into the measurements and ornamentation of temples, palaces, mausoleums, fortresses, and other public buildings their knowledge of the laws controlling the universe. Every initiated workman was given a hieroglyphic with which he marked the stones he trod to show to all posterity that he thus dedicated to the supreme architect of the universe each perfected product of his labor. Concerning Mason's marks, Robert Freck Gould writes, "It is very remarkable that these marks are to be found in all countries, in the chambers of the Great Pyramid at Giza, on the underground walls of Jerusalem, in Herculaneum and Pompeii, on Roman walls and Grecian temples, in Hindustan, Mexico, Peru, Asia Minor, as well as on the great ruins of England, France, Germany, Scotland, Italy, Portugal, and Spain. See a concise history of Freemasonry." From this viewpoint, the history of Hiram may well represent the incorporation of the divine secrets of architecture into the actual parts and dimensions of earthly buildings. The 3 degrees of the craft bury the Grand Master, the Grand Arcanum, in the actual structure they erect, after first having killed him with the builder's tools by reducing the dimensionless spirit of cosmic beauty to the limitations of concrete form. These abstract ideals of architecture can be resurrected, however, by the master mason who, by meditating upon the structure, releases therefrom the divine principles of architectonic philosophy incorporated of or buried within. Thus, the physical building is actually the tomb or embodiment of the creative ideal of which its material dimensions are but the shadow. Moreover, the Hiramic legend may be considered to embody the vicissitudes of philosophy itself. As institutions for the dissemination of ethical culture, the pagan mysteries were the architects of civilization. Their power and dignity were personified in Hiram Abiff, the master builder, but they eventually fell a victim to the onslaughts of that recurrent trio of state, church, and mob. They were desecrated by the state, jealous of their wealth and power, by the early church, fearful of their wisdom, by the rabble of solidarity incited by both state and church. I'm going to read that again because that's a pretty cool thing to remember. They were desecrated by the state, jealous of their wealth and power, by the early church, fearful of their wisdom, and by the rabble and solidarity incited by both state and church. As Hiram, when raised from his grave, whispers the master mason's word, which was lost through his untimely death, so according to the tenets of philosophy, the reestablishment or resurrection of the ancient mysteries will result in the rediscovery of that secret teaching, without which civilization must continue in a state of spiritual confusion and uncertainty. When the mob governs, man is ruled by ignorance. When the church governs, he is ruled by superstition. And when the state governs, he is ruled by fear. Before men can live together in harmony and understanding, ignorance must be transmuted into wisdom, superstition into an illumined faith, and fear into love. Despite statements to the contrary, Masonry is a religion seeking to unite God and man by elevating its initiates to that level of consciousness whereon they can behold the clarified vision, the workings of the great architect of the universe. Don't care. Still don't trust it. From age to age, the vision of the perfect civilization is preserved as the ideal for mankind. In the midst of that civilization shall stand a mighty university, wherein both the sacred and secular sciences concerning the mysteries of life will be freely taught to all who will assume the philosophic life. Here, creed and dogma will have no place. The superficial will be removed and only the essential be preserved. The world will be ruled by its most illumined minds, and each will occupy the position for which he is most admirably fitted. Yeah, I can see why a bunch of people would want to blow each other in caves. Makes complete sense. Makes complete sense if that's what you're looking for. Sounds like a really nice thing. Like a nice, group of dudes. Maybe that's in the later degrees. I don't know. I maybe I'll find out more. I got a lot more reading to do. It's really good though. I love this book. It's not that I don't like it. I fucking love Manly P. Hall. Manly P. Hall is an amazing speaker, but I always got to keep in mind that this motherfucker was a 33rd degree, the voice of this movement. To not keep that in perspective is a very, very, very serious mistake. But he's fucking good. I'll give him that. The great university will be divided into grades, admission to which will be through preliminary tests or initiations. Here, mankind will be instructed in the most sacred, the most secret, and the most enduring of all mysteries, symbolism. Here, the initiate will be taught that every visible object, every abstract thought, every emotional reaction is but the symbol of an eternal principle. Here, mankind will learn that Hiram, truth, lies buried in every atom of cosmos, that every form is a symbol and every symbol the tomb of an eternal verity. Through education, spiritual, mental, moral, and physical, man will learn to release living truths from their lifeless coverings. The perfect government of the earth must be patterned eventually after the divine government by which the universe is ordered. In that day, when perfect order is reestablished, the peace, universal and good triumphant, men will no longer seek for happiness, for they shall find it welling up within themselves. Dead hopes, dead aspirations, dead virtues shall rise from their graves, and the spirit of beauty and goodness repeatedly slain by ignorant men shall again be the master of work. Then shall sages sit upon the seats of the mighty, and the gods walk with men. Sounds like a fucking military advertisement. That's the end of chapter 16. Chapter 17 is on the Pythagorean theory of music and color. Ah,